This story is titled, Mom and Dad Demanded I Donate My Kidney to Younger Golden Child Brother. After I refused, they disowned me. Later, he used police force to bring me back home. Hey Reddit, I need to get this story out before I lose my mind completely. I'm 26 years old, and what I'm about to share has shaken the very foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it. Growing up, I always thought my family was normal. My parents weren't particularly affectionate. They never showered me with hugs or verbal expressions of love, but they weren't cruel either. They always made sure my brother and I had what we needed. Food on the table, clothes on our backs, a roof over our heads. We celebrated birthdays with cake and presents, went on occasional family vacations, and they always put on the perfect family act when relatives or friends were around. Nothing about our household screamed dysfunctional. I have an older brother, Tyler, who's 30 now. If you had asked me last year, I would have said we were treated fairly by our parents. Not exactly the same. There were differences in how they approached each of us, but nothing that seemed particularly unusual or concerning. Now I realize my parents had me convinced of a complete lie for my entire life. Growing up, I noticed little things that felt off, but nothing major. Just small moments that made me wonder if I was imagining things. For instance, whenever Tyler and I got into arguments, which siblings naturally do, my parents would always make me apologize first. Even if we were both clearly in the wrong, even if he had started the conflict. If I tried to argue my side or stand up for myself, they'd tell me I was being difficult, dramatic, or too sensitive. When Tyler got in trouble at school, my parents immediately jumped to his defense. They'd argue that the teachers were being unfair or that he was just stressed from all his activities. But when I got in trouble, I'd receive lengthy lectures about making better choices and taking responsibility for my actions. If Tyler forgot something important, my parents would drop everything to help him. When I forgot something, they'd sigh deeply and remind me that I needed to be more responsible. It was a pattern that persisted throughout my childhood. These little inequities that I brushed off because, well, what else was I supposed to do? When you grow up in a certain environment, you don't question it. You simply accept that's how life is. Tyler was really into basketball, and my parents were absolutely obsessed with his games. Every single weekend they were there in the stands, cheering loudly, arguing with referees, and investing their whole hearts in his athletic journey. I, on the other hand, was passionate about theater, but they never came to a single one of my performances. Not even once. When I'd ask why they couldn't make it, they always had some excuse ready. They were too tired, had other commitments, something urgent came up. Yet somehow, they were never too exhausted for Tyler's games. After a while, I stopped asking. It didn't feel worth the disappointment anymore. Tyler never really saw me as a real person, just an annoyance who happened to share the same living space. If I received even a little bit of attention from our parents, he'd roll his eyes or make some snide comment under his breath. When I won a theater competition in high school, a significant achievement I was incredibly proud of, he just scoffed and said, "Too bad nobody cares about theater." If I got better grades than him on a test or assignment, which happened frequently, he'd break my pencils or mutter that I just got lucky with an easy teacher. He resented me simply for existing, as if I was taking up space and resources that should have rightfully been his alone. And my parents? They never stepped in to stop his behavior. They just let it happen, as if it was perfectly normal for him to treat me this way. Even in conversations with extended family and friends, my parents loved talking about Tyler. How talented he was, how smart he was, how bright his future looked. When they talked about me, it was never about my own achievements or qualities. Instead, it was always in relation to how I supported Tyler, how I was such a good sister, how I was always there for him. In their eyes, my entire identity seemed to be defined by my relationship to my brother. I was his shadow, his support system, never my own person. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that the situation wasn't that bad, that some families just naturally have favorites, and that it didn't mean my parents didn't love me. I thought I was just being overly sensitive about the whole thing. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts more. Everything changed dramatically around last year. Tyler was diagnosed with kidney disease, and my parents were absolutely devastated. I was shocked too. He had always been the picture of health. He went through various treatments and medications, but his condition kept deteriorating despite the doctor's best efforts. Eventually, they said he needed a transplant to survive. The second the doctors mentioned the word transplant, I could feel my parents' eyes on me. I remember sitting in that sterile hospital room when the doctor brought it up. My mom immediately turned to me. her face lighting up with what I can only describe as expectant relief, and said, "Wouldn't it be amazing if you were a match?" She was already smiling, already acting like this was a foregone conclusion, like I was about to heroically save the day, just as I had always been expected to do my entire life. My dad nodded along as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Tyler barely looked up from his phone, seemingly uninterested in the conversation that was essentially about his life. I remember feeling so strange about the whole interaction. It's not that I was against helping. Of course, I didn't want my brother to die, regardless of our complicated relationship. But something about how quickly they decided that this was unquestionably my responsibility made my stomach turn. It wasn't even framed as a discussion or a request. They didn't ask if I was okay with it or how I felt about undergoing major surgery. It was simply expected of me, like I had no say in the matter whatsoever. I went along with the initial testing because I didn't want to start a fight at such a difficult time. If I'm being completely honest, a part of me hoped I wouldn't be a match. I told myself that if the results came back negative, at least I wouldn't have to deal with the emotional fallout of making a difficult decision. But life doesn't work that way. As luck would have it, I was a match. A good one, in fact. The moment those results came in, it was as if I had already signed up for the surgery. My mom cried tears of joy. My dad patted my back proudly and said, "We knew you wouldn't let us down." Tyler didn't even say anything at first, just nodded slightly as if to say, "Yeah, that's exactly what's supposed to happen." I felt physically ill. When I tried to bring up the subject casually later that evening, just mentioning that this was a really significant decision that I wanted to take some time to think about carefully, my mom immediately shut me down. "Diana, this is your brother," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You don't think twice about family." It wasn't presented as a request or a question. It was a command. My dad scoffed, shaking his head like I had just said the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. "What do you mean you're not sure?" he demanded incredulously. "What kind of person hesitates when their own flesh and blood needs them?" That's when I started to realize just how trapped I truly was in this situation. I decided to do my own research, looking up what kidney donation actually entailed. I knew it was major surgery, but I hadn't realized how much risk was involved, especially for someone with my medical history. I have some underlying health issues that would make the surgery more complicated than usual. My doctor explained in a private consultation that my recovery wouldn't be like that of most donors. I wouldn't just bounce back in a few weeks as many people do. I could potentially be incapacitated for months, and even after that, my body would never be quite the same. I'd be more prone to kidney disease myself going forward, and my risk for long-term complications was significantly higher than average. Most alarmingly, if something were to happen to my remaining kidney in the future, I'd be in serious trouble. Then there was the financial aspect to consider. I have substantial student loans that I'm still paying off, and I work at a marketing agency that doesn't offer paid medical leave. If I went through with this donation, I wouldn't just be losing a kidney. I'd be losing my income, my financial stability, and my ability to take care of myself independently. I could potentially end up drowning in debt, all because my parents expected me to do this without question or consideration for my own well-being. As I contemplated all these factors, I realized something even more troubling. Not once had my parents or Tyler ever asked how I felt about any of this. They didn't ask if I was scared about the surgery or if I had concerns about my recovery. They didn't sit me down and say, "Diana, this is your choice, and we support you no matter what decision you make." Because to them, it wasn't a choice. It was a duty, an obligation that wasn't up for discussion. In their eyes, I wasn't their daughter with agency and autonomy. I was simply their solution to a problem. I kept hoping that maybe I was wrong about the whole situation. I thought that if I sat my parents down and calmly explained all of my concerns, the health risks, the financial burden, the lengthy recovery, they would understand. I genuinely believed that they would realize what they were asking wasn't fair, and that maybe, just maybe, they would actually see me as a person with valid concerns for the first time in my life. So that's exactly what I did. I gathered my courage, sat them down in our living room, took a deep breath to steady my nerves, and told them, "I don't think I can do this." The second those words left my mouth, the entire room went completely silent. My mom's face froze in an expression of disbelief, like her brain simply refused to process what I had just said. My dad blinked at me repeatedly, confused, as if I had suddenly started speaking a language he couldn't understand. And Tyler? He just exhaled sharply, shook his head, and muttered, "Of course, typical." I don't know why I thought they would actually listen to me. I don't know why I believed my feelings would finally matter to them. Just this once. What do you mean you don't think you can do this? My mom's voice was sharp and cutting, like she was challenging me rather than asking a genuine question. Her tone suggested I had just made an absurd claim that demanded justification. I tried to explain myself clearly. I mean, I've been talking to my doctor, and it's not a simple surgery for me. There are a lot of risks involved, and my recovery could take months. I'd have to take time off work, and My dad cut me off with a dismissive scoff. So what? People donate kidneys all the time, and they're fine. I struggled to keep my voice steady as I continued. Not everyone, and certainly not me. My doctor said my situation is different because of my medical history. It's not just a few weeks of recovery we're talking about. It's months of being unable to work, and financially, Oh, don't even start with that, my mom snapped, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is about your brother's life, Diana. How can you even think about money right now? Because it's my life too. I wanted to scream. Because I'm the one who would have to live with the consequences. Because I wasn't even given the chance to decide this for myself before they all made up their minds. But I didn't say any of that out loud. I could already feel the shift in the atmosphere, the way their faces hardened the moment they realized I wasn't just hesitating. I was actually considering saying no. And just like that, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was the problem. Tyler rolled his eyes dramatically. Unbelievable, he muttered under his breath. I turned to face him directly. Tyler, this isn't personal. You're making it personal, he shot back, standing up too, his voice rising. You're choosing to let me die. That's not what I'm doing, I insisted, feeling increasingly cornered. I need time to think. What is there to think about? My dad's voice had gone ice cold. This is your brother, Diana. He'd do it for you. I actually laughed then. A short, bitter laugh because that was possibly the biggest lie I'd ever heard in my entire life. Would he? I asked, looking directly at Tyler, challenging him. If the situation was reversed, would you give me your kidney? His eyes darted to our parents for a split second, seeking guidance before he muttered, That's not the point. Right. Of course it wasn't. The point was that I was expected to sacrifice, but he never would be. My mom was barely containing her rage now. I can't believe you're doing this, she whispered, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine emotion. After everything we've done for you. That's when the guilt trip started in earnest. My dad began listing everything they had ever spent money on for me. My school tuition, my clothes, my childhood doctor's visits, as if providing for their child was some extraordinary act of generosity that now required repayment. My mom started crying, repeatedly asking, How could you do this to us? Over and over, like I had committed some unforgivable betrayal against the family. They called me ungrateful, selfish, a disappointment, every word designed to make me question my own judgment. And then Tyler delivered what he clearly thought would be the final blow. You know what, Diana? His voice was cold and cutting. I always knew you'd be useless when it actually mattered. Those words hurt, not because I expected better from him, but because I didn't. And yet some stupid, pathetic part of me still hoped for kindness where there had never been any before. My entire childhood flashed through my mind as he spoke. Every time I had cheered for him from the sidelines, every time I had given up something I wanted so he could have it instead, every single instance where I had put his needs before my own because that was what was expected of me. I had always prioritized him because I was taught that was what I was supposed to do. And now, the one time I needed to put myself first, the one time I dared to consider my own well-being, I was nothing to him. I felt something inside me crack in that moment. I told them I didn't want to talk about it anymore and was about to leave the room. It should have ended there, but my mom wasn't done yet. She gripped my arm as I was walking toward the door, her fingers digging into my skin painfully. Her face was contorted with an expression I had never seen before. A mixture of rage, disappointment, and something else I couldn't quite identify. You are his sister, she hissed through clenched teeth. You were born to help him. I froze instantly. I don't know what expression showed on my face, but the second those words left her mouth, she let go of my arm like she had suddenly realized she had said too much. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped back, wiping at her face, deliberately avoiding meeting my eyes. My dad had gone suspiciously still, and even Tyler shifted uncomfortably in place. Something in my stomach turned violently. What do you mean I was born to help him? I demanded, my voice stronger now. No one answered. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at my dad, searching for some explanation, but he offered nothing. I turned to Tyler, but he wouldn't even look at me. Then my mom muttered, "You're being dramatic," and turned away dismissively. But I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't imagining things. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't realize yet how deeply disturbing the truth would turn out to be. I don't even remember leaving the house after that. I must have grabbed my bag and keys in a daze because suddenly I was in my car, driving without any clear destination in mind. I felt like I was about to throw up, my heart pounding violently in my chest. I had to pull over at a gas station to collect myself. Only one thought kept circling in my mind. What did she mean? Why had she said that as if it were an established fact? And why had my dad and Tyler reacted like it was something I was never supposed to have heard? After sitting in my car for what felt like hours, I thought of going to my Aunt Victoria's house. She had always been kind to me, more attentive than my parents in many ways. I was barely holding myself together the whole drive there. By the time I walked through her front door, I must have looked like a complete wreck because she didn't even ask any questions. She just hugged me tightly and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I didn't sleep at all that night. By the time morning came, I felt like I was running on nothing but raw nerves and anxiety. I sat at Aunt Victoria's kitchen table, clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, and told her everything. Every word, every look, every second of that horrible conversation with my family. I expected her to tell me I was overthinking it, that my parents were just emotional because of Tyler's condition, that they were saying things they didn't mean in the heat of the moment. I thought she'd tell me I was letting my imagination run wild. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed deeply and rubbed her temples, like she was bracing herself for something difficult. And then she said, "Diana, there's something I need to tell you." I felt my stomach tighten with dread, waiting for her to continue. But she hesitated, like she was debating whether or not she should say the words out loud. I knew whatever was coming was bad. Really bad. Finally, she exhaled heavily and looked me directly in the eyes. "Your parents didn't have you because they wanted another child," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "They had you because Tyler needed a bone marrow donor." I stared at her, waiting for her to say it was a bad joke, that she was mistaken, that she had misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. But she didn't take it back or soften the blow. "When he was 4, he got sick," she continued solemnly. "They were desperate to save him, and they couldn't find a match among existing family members or in the donor registry. So they made one." I heard the words. I understood them on a basic level. But it was as if my brain refused to fully process what she was saying. My parents had planned my conception not because they wanted me, not because they dreamed of expanding their family, but because they needed me. I wasn't born out of love, or even an accident. I was born out of necessity, created for a specific purpose. My whole life flashed through my mind, and suddenly everything made perfect, horrible sense. Every moment that had ever made me feel like I was on the outside looking in at my own family. The way my achievements were never celebrated with the same enthusiasm as Tyler's. The way my presence was never the priority at family gatherings. The way my parents always made it clear, subtly in 1,000 small ways, that Tyler came first. It wasn't because they just happened to favor him naturally, as some parents do. It wasn't because he was more lovable or accomplished or charming. It was because he was the reason I existed in the first place. I was created as a means to an end. His end. "They never told me," I said, my voice sounding distant and hollow even to my own ears. Aunt Victoria nodded, her expression filled with a mixture of guilt and compassion. "They were never going to," she admitted quietly. "They raised you to believe this was just normal. They didn't think you ever needed to know the truth." I couldn't speak. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, believing that if I just did enough, achieved enough, gave enough, then maybe I would finally matter to them the way Tyler did. But I never stood a chance. I was never supposed to be anything more than a body they could use if Tyler needed it. I don't remember much of what Aunt Victoria said after that. She kept apologizing over and over for not telling me sooner, as if it was somehow her fault. It wasn't. She hadn't been the one who lied to me my entire life. The next few days blurred together in a haze. I didn't go home. I ignored my parents' increasingly frequent calls, their texts, and the voicemails they left. I needed to figure out how to exist in this new reality, now that I knew the truth about my origins. My parents acted like everything was fine, like we hadn't just had the worst fight of our lives. My mom's messages were strangely gentle, almost too understanding, like she was talking to a child having a tantrum. She told me she knew I was just overwhelmed and that she believed I'd come to the right decision once I had time to think things through. My dad's texts were brief but equally unsettling. We're ready to talk again when you are. Family sticks together. You know what's expected. Tyler, unsurprisingly, stayed completely silent. He didn't need to say anything. In his mind, there was no decision to make. I would do what I was supposed to do, what I had literally been born to do. A week passed, and when they realized I wasn't responding to their messages, the tone changed dramatically. My mom's texts turned harsh, her disappointment practically dripping from every word. My dad stopped pretending to be reasonable. "You're making him suffer for nothing," he wrote. "This is the kind of thing you regret for the rest of your life." The thin veneer of kindness was gone now. They were just waiting for me to crack under the pressure. I blocked their numbers. I don't know why I expected them to stop there, but blocking them gave me a few days of blessed silence. Yet it was the kind of quiet that felt too still, like the moment before a devastating storm. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting something to happen, though I wasn't sure what. My aunt told me I was doing the right thing, that I needed to focus on myself and my own well-being for once. But I could see the way she watched me, like she was waiting for me to break down completely. Maybe she thought I would cave eventually, that I would suddenly snap out of whatever stubborn rebellion I was engaged in and go back to being the daughter my parents had always expected me to be. And honestly, a small, horrible part of me wondered if she was right. Because for as much as I had every reason to walk away from my family forever, it still felt unnatural not to care about what happened to them. It felt like I was betraying some invisible contract that had been forced upon me since birth. Then, on a random Tuesday night, the storm finally hit. I got pulled over on my way to work that Tuesday evening. I wasn't speeding. My registration was completely up to date. I wasn't on my phone. There was absolutely no reason for me to be pulled over. Yet when the officer walked up to my window, it quickly became clear that he wasn't looking for a traffic violation. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous tip regarding illegal substances in your vehicle," he said flatly. "I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the car." My entire body went cold with shock. "What?" was all I could manage to say. "Step out of the car, please," he repeated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I knew I had nothing to hide. I had never done anything illegal in my life. But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, like this was already a foregone conclusion, made my hands shake uncontrollably as I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the vehicle. They searched my car thoroughly, and then, under my driver's seat, they found a small plastic bag filled with what appeared to be drugs. I had never seen that bag before in my life. I had no idea where it had come from or how it got there. But the second I saw it, a sickening realization washed over me. I knew exactly what had happened and who was responsible. I barely registered the officer saying they needed to bring me in for questioning. I was too busy trying to piece together how they had done it, how they had managed to plant evidence in my car. It had to have been my parents' doing, though I wasn't entirely sure of the specifics yet. They took me to the police station, but I wasn't officially placed under arrest. I kept telling them the same thing over and over. It wasn't mine. I had never seen it before. I was certain someone had set me up deliberately. After what felt like an eternity of questioning, the officer sighed heavily and said, "There are security cameras in that parking lot where you work." I almost collapsed with relief at those words. It took some time for them to review the surveillance footage, and every second that passed, I could feel my entire life dangling on the edge of a precipice. If the cameras hadn't caught anything, if they couldn't prove I didn't put those drugs in my car myself, then what would happen to me? Would I lose my job? Would I face criminal charges? Would my parents swoop in to bail me out just so they could say, "See? You need us now. Do what we're asking?" But then finally, one of the officers nodded and said, "Found something." I held my breath as they pulled up the footage on a monitor. And there, clear as day, was Tyler. He wasn't even being subtle about it. The video showed him crouching next to my car, glancing around a few times to make sure no one was watching, then sliding the bag under my seat through the partially open window. He moved with a practiced ease that suggested this wasn't his first time doing something like this. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh at the absurdity of it all. The officers exchanged meaningful glances, and one of them nodded curtly. "She's free to go," he said firmly, "but we're going to have to bring him in." The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and statements. I sat in the station, feeling completely numb, while they arrested Tyler. He didn't resist when they found him. He didn't even try to explain or defend himself. I could already picture how this would play out. He'd act remorseful, say it was a terrible mistake, blame his emotional state and medical condition. And somehow, my parents would make sure he received the least possible punishment. Speaking of my parents, they showed up at the station within an hour of Tyler's arrest, absolutely furious. Not at him for what he'd done, but at me. My mom was in full hysterics, crying dramatically into a tissue, her voice deliberately loud enough to ensure everyone in the station could hear her suffering. "He's sick," she kept repeating through her tears. "He's sick! He didn't know what he was doing! You have to understand!" My dad, meanwhile, turned his anger directly toward me. "You forced him into this," he said, his eyes burning with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "You made him desperate." I stared at them in disbelief. "Are you kidding me?" My voice came out too quiet, too controlled, too dangerous. "You saw the footage. He tried to get me arrested for drug possession. You're really blaming me for that?" "He wouldn't have done this if you had just done what you were supposed to do," my mom snapped, dabbing at her obviously fake tears. "You pushed him to this, Diana. You left him with no other choice." At that moment, watching them frantically defending Tyler, despite the clear evidence of what he'd done, something in me finally snapped completely. For years, I had let them make me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I was selfish for wanting things for myself, like if I just tried harder, if I was just a little better, they would finally love me the way they loved Tyler. But here I was, standing in a police station, staring at the undeniable proof that my brother had just tried to ruin my life entirely, and they were still choosing him without hesitation. There was never going to be a version of this story where they would choose me over him. I was done pretending otherwise. I turned to my mom, barely recognizing my own voice when I spoke. "You did this to him," I said coldly. "You made him this way." She blinked at me, still playing the devastated mother role. "What are you talking about?" she sniffled, shaking her head as if I was speaking nonsense. I took a step toward her. "Aunt Victoria told me," I said, watching her face carefully. "She told me why you had me." My mom's expression changed instantly. The tears stopped as if she had flipped an internal switch. My dad, who had been standing stiffly beside her, suddenly went very still. "I don't know what she told you," my mom said carefully, "but she's always wanted to turn you against us." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's what you're going with?" I asked incredulously. "That she lied?" I took another step closer, forcing them to look directly at me. "Tell me the truth," I demanded. "Did you have me just so I could be a donor for Tyler?" My mom glanced at my dad nervously, but neither of them spoke. I felt the anger rising in my chest, hot and suffocating. "Say it," I insisted. My mom looked at me for a long moment before finally tilting her chin up defiantly. "We did what we had to do," she said, her voice sharp and unapologetic. "You wouldn't be here if it weren't for Tyler." The words hit harder than I thought they would. I mean, I already knew the truth. Aunt Victoria had told me, and deep down it made perfect sense. It explained everything about my childhood and my place in the family. But hearing my mom say it so easily, like it was just a simple fact, like I was being ridiculous for even questioning it, that still stung deeply. I looked at my dad, half expecting him to at least try to soften the blow, maybe say something like, "That's not quite how it was," or "You're misunderstanding the situation." But he didn't. There was no hesitation, no guilt in his expression, just a simple, flat statement. We saved his life. That was the priority, not me, never me. "So that's it?" I asked, more to myself than to them. "That's all I ever was to you? A backup plan?" My mom didn't even look fazed by the conversation. If anything, she looked annoyed, like she was tired of the discussion and just wanted to move past it so we could focus on Tyler again. "We raised you," she said dismissively. "We gave you everything you needed. You had a home, food, and education. And now, when it's your turn to step up for this family, you're turning your back on us." That was actually funny, in a dark, twisted way. "Oh, so now I'm part of the family." I shook my head in disbelief. "You didn't want me. You just needed me." One of the officers cleared his throat, reminding us all that we were still standing in the middle of a police station. "If you're done with this family discussion, we have charges to process," he said pointedly. My mom turned to him so quickly, it was like she had completely forgotten I was even standing there. "You don't understand," she pleaded, her voice taking on that desperate quality again. "My son, he was just desperate. He wasn't thinking clearly. His medical condition—" I glanced at the officer. To his credit, he didn't even blink at her theatrics. "The security footage speaks for itself, ma'am," he said firmly. That's when my dad shifted tactics. Instead of continuing to defend Tyler's inexcusable actions, he took a step toward the officer. "We can work something out," he said in a low voice, his tone suggesting some kind of negotiation. "There's no need for all this. We don't want to escalate things." He was negotiating. Like Tyler hadn't just tried to frame me for a crime that could have destroyed my entire life. Like this was just some minor problem that could be handled with the right words and perhaps the right amount of money. That was it. That was all I needed to know about where I stood with them. I turned to the officer, my decision already made. "I'd like to press charges," I said firmly. My mom sucked in a shocked breath, like I had just slapped her across the face. "Diana, you wouldn't!" she gasped. I didn't hesitate. "I would." My dad's face darkened. "You're making a mistake," he warned. I met his eyes without flinching. "No," I said evenly. "The mistake was ever thinking you cared about me. And that was it, I was done with them. It's been over a year since I walked out of that police station, and every day since, I've been learning what it means to live without the family I was born into. At first, it felt surreal, like I was waiting for the inevitable, waiting for them to show up at my door, to force me back into the role I was supposed to play. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized something both terrifying and liberating. They were never going to change. They had always been this way. I was just finally seeing them for what they truly were. Tyler stayed in prison. My parents did everything they could to get him out. But money only stretches so far when you've already mortgaged your house to the limit trying to save your golden child. I thought once they saw how serious the situation was, they'd stop their campaign against me and finally leave me alone. But they didn't. Instead, they started a GoFundMe campaign. I wish I was joking. My mom created this elaborate sob story about how I had abandoned them in their time of need and how Tyler was wrongfully accused. She painted herself as the heartbroken mother of a sick child, struggling heroically to keep the family together while her selfish daughter ruined everything. And of course, people ate it up. Distant relatives, family friends, even complete strangers started donating and leaving comments about how awful I was, how family should always come first, how I was the villain in this story. I might have just let them dig their own graves and moved on with my life. But then one night, as I sat at my Aunt Victoria's kitchen table, she sighed and looked at me like she had an idea she wasn't sure I'd agree with. "We should talk to your old doctor," she suggested cautiously. I frowned, confused. "What doctor?" "The one they took you to when you were a kid. The family doctor," she clarified. "He might have records, proof." I didn't feel like I needed proof. I already knew what they had done. But Aunt Victoria made a good point. If there were documents, something undeniable that exposed the truth about my conception and purpose, maybe I could stop them from continuing to spread lies about me. So we tracked down Dr. Evans. He had retired years ago, but when we explained why we wanted to talk to him, he agreed to meet with us. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a few confirming details. Maybe just reassurance that I wasn't crazy for believing what my aunt had told me. But what he revealed was worse than anything I had ever imagined. I wasn't their second child. I was their fourth attempt. They had conceived 3 babies before me. 3 pregnancies, 3 terminations when genetic testing showed the fetus wasn't a perfect match for Tyler. They weren't just trying for a second child who might possibly be a match. They were systematically trying to build the perfect donor. I felt physically sick. My entire life, I had clung to the hope that maybe, deep down, there was some love there. That maybe if I had just been enough, if I had done more, tried harder, they would have eventually loved me the way they loved Tyler. But I never even stood a chance. I wasn't born because they wanted me. I was born because I was the first successful match after multiple attempts. Aunt Victoria held my hand tightly as I sat there trying to remember how to breathe, while Dr. Evans handed me old records and medical documents, things my parents probably thought I would never see. I took those records and made a decision. I sent everything to the authorities. Once the investigation started, it spiraled out of control faster than anyone could have anticipated. The fertility doctor my parents had worked with lost his license immediately. It turned out my parents weren't even the only ones who had done this. There were other families, other donor babies created under the same questionable ethical circumstances. The scandal exploded, and my parents lost everything. The GoFundMe donations dried up. Family members who had previously supported them disappeared overnight, and their names were dragged through the mud in both traditional and social media. And instead of admitting what they had done, They just doubled down. My dad called it fake news, while my mom claimed they were being persecuted for being good parents who did what was necessary for their son. And Tyler? He sat in prison, still acting like none of this was his fault, still believing he was the victim in all of this. For a long time, I thought they would disappear into the mess they had created and finally leave me alone. But my parents had one last cruel stunt left in them. One night, my cousin Julia called me, her voice filled with panic. "Diana, I don't know if you've heard," she said breathlessly, "but Tyler tried to take his own life." I felt something heavy drop in my chest. "What?" I managed to say, my mind racing. "I just saw your mom's Facebook post," Julia continued. "She's saying he couldn't take it anymore, that he's in critical condition, that if you have even a shred of love left for your family, you'd come see him." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the pain they had caused me, I didn't want Tyler to die. I wanted to believe it wasn't true. But what if it was? What if, despite everything, he really had hit rock bottom? So I decided to verify the information directly. I called the prison where Tyler was being held. I didn't ask for details, didn't want to get sucked into another manipulation game orchestrated by my parents. I just asked one simple question. "Is my brother alive?" The officer on the phone sounded almost bored when he answered. "Yeah, he's fine." I exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of relief and growing anger. "Is he in critical condition?" I pressed. There was a brief pause then. Not even close. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. They were lying again, fabricating a suicide attempt just to guilt me into coming back into their lives, back under their control. I wasn't even surprised anymore. They had never cared about the truth, only about manipulating situations to get what they wanted. Instead of responding to their desperate ploy, I sent the Facebook post to the authorities investigating my parents' case. Within a week, they had nothing left. Family members who had been on the fence finally cut them off completely. Their remaining friends abandoned them, unwilling to be associated with people who would lie about something as serious as a suicide attempt. My mom deleted her social media accounts, and my dad stopped trying to fight the charges against them. It's been over a year now since all this happened, and my life is nothing like it used to be, in the best possible way. I moved to a new city, got a new job, and for the first time ever, I feel like I actually belong somewhere. Like I'm living for myself, rather than existing for someone else's benefit. And the best part? I'm engaged now. My fiancé, Ryan, knows everything. Every dark, twisted detail of what my family put me through. And instead of treating me like some broken, tragic figure who deserves pity, he treats me like a person with value. Like I matter simply for being who I am. The biggest change, though? I'm pregnant. When I first found out, I was terrified. After everything I had been through, after seeing firsthand the damage that can be done by parents who view their children as means to an end rather than people to be loved unconditionally, I was scared that I wouldn't know how to be a good parent. I worried that I might somehow repeat the same toxic patterns my parents had established, despite my best intentions. But then Ryan told me something that changed everything. You know exactly what not to do. And he's right. This baby will never grow up wondering if they were wanted. They will never feel like they have to earn my love. They will never be treated like a spare part for someone else. They will be loved fully, completely, unconditionally, for who they are, not for what they can provide. I may not have been born into a real family, but I am creating one now. And for the first time in my life, I am truly happy. I'm building the kind of life I always deserved, but never thought I could have. Thank you to everyone who has supported me through all of this. My Aunt Victoria, my cousins who stood by me, the friends who didn't judge, and now Ryan and our growing family. I can't even explain how much it's meant to know that I'm not crazy for walking away, that I made the right choice in putting my own well-being first after a lifetime of being expected to sacrifice it. I finally feel like I have a future worth looking forward to. A future where I'm valued as a person, not as a resource. A future where I can raise my child to know they are loved for exactly who they are, not what they can do for someone else. A future where I can heal from the past and create something beautiful from the ashes of what was never really a family to begin with. For anyone out there who might be in a similar situation, who feels trapped in toxic family dynamics, or who has discovered uncomfortable truths about their own origins, you are more than what others intended for you. Your life is your own. And sometimes, walking away is the bravest, healthiest thing you can do. It's okay to choose yourself. It's okay to build a new family based on love rather than obligation. It's okay to rewrite your story with a happier ending than the one that was planned for you.